everybody, it's Wendy. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here today. We're going to be using this fun Jars of Love stamp set and the coordinating framelit set that goes with it called Everyday Jars. And this is probably one of my top 3 very favorite stamp sets or bundles in the new catalog. Okay, so I am going to be doing some fun sponging here to create the background for my card. I'm going to start out using crumb cake ink and sponge just the bottom. Then I'm going to come in with some So Saffron, Blushing Bride, and Elegant Eggplant. So I have a really fun story for you that goes along with this card, and I thought I would share that story while I inked this. If you visit my website or my blog, you would be able to read the story because I did go ahead and type it out there, but I'm going to share it with you here as well. So a lot of times my cards are inspired by emotion or feeling that I get when I see something, a stamp set or image in a stamp set, and that's where I get my inspiration from. I'm a pretty emotionally charged person. I think a lot of creative people are. And so when I see something that sparks an emotion, then I try to create a card based on that feeling. And so that's where this card came from. So when I was very, very young, I was 17, I got married. And I moved to North Carolina and lived with my ex-husband there who was in the military. I am no longer married to the same person. This is my second marriage, and that's something that I don't talk about very often, but it is what it is. I made a very youthful mistake, and so we ran away basically to North Carolina and lived there on the Army base. I was miserable. I was very unhappy. I longed for home, which is California for me. I longed for my family so much, and it was a really, really, really hard time in my life. I don't have very many fond memories there. Most of my memories of that time in my life are pretty horrible, and so I had this moment when I saw this stamp set, and it has these little lightning bugs. I'm sorry about my camera here going in and out of focus. I'm not sure what happened. I think it's probably has something to do with the silicone mat. But anyway, when I saw the little lightning bug in the stamp set, it took me back to my time in North Carolina, which normally would not be a good thing. That would normally be upsetting to me and be something I wouldn't want to think about or talk about. But the truth is that everything we do in our lives, good, bad, and otherwise, make us who we are today, right? So it's not a time I necessarily regret in my life because I learned so much from that experience. And I think I'm a better wife today for having gone through that than I would have been had I not gone through that. So, anyway, let me tell you what I'm doing here real quick and I'll get back to the story. I'm using Memento Tuxedo Black ink to stamp the little mason jar. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time here doing some die cutting. The jar stamps or bundle has the framelit set, and the framelets cut out the outside of this mason jar and the inside. So I about fell over when I saw that because that is an instant shaker ability, right? I can put a little shaker piece together. So that's what I'm doing here. So anyway, a friend of mine that lived in California, who was a friend of our family, had family that lived in North Carolina, and she knew how forlorn I was and melancholy, and she reached out to her family in North Carolina and asked if myself and my husband at the time could go visit them for dinner or something like that. And of course they said sure, they obliged, they were happy to do that. And so we drove and went to visit them. It was the best night I ever spent in North Carolina. The people were amazing. They were kind, they were loving, they were funny. They were sitting out, in their backyard, and they had this big, lush, beautiful green backyard. And I think there was some sort of crop that backed up to their backyard. I thought it was weeds, but I'm pretty sure it was a crop of some sort. And we sat out there and visited, and they had a fire going, and I felt for a moment that I was back home, like that I was part of a family again, and belonging in a place that seemed like home to me. And it was the best night I ever had in North Carolina. And as I was sitting there in that backyard, I saw across their backyard, up against those crops or those weeds, whatever they were, all these flashing lights. And I was completely mesmerized by this. And I asked them, like, what is that? What is happening over there? And they started laughing at me, and they were like, those are lightning bugs. And I had never seen a lightning bug. Being from California, we don't really have lightning bugs here. So I was so entranced. I went and grabbed something. I don't even remember what it was. I don't think it was a mason jar, but I wanted to catch one so bad. And for this moment in time, I went back to being an 18-year-old girl. At the time I was 18, I had lived there a year. And I felt like, I don't know, like it was like I was a kid again, which I should have been, right? I was 18 years old, so I should have been that way anyway. But anyway, that's my story of this card and North Carolina. This card captures that one night in North Carolina that was my best night in North Carolina. So that is what this card is for me. So it's so funny when I think people sometimes laugh or think it's silly that card making is so important to me, but that's part of the reason it is because I get therapy out of it. It brings emotions and feelings to me when I'm creating. I'm sure the same as it would for an artist. And so, anyway, that's my story of North Carolina. Real quick, I want to share what I just did here. I cut a mason jar out of acetate window, and I laid it down on the little framed piece of the mason jar. Then I put some of our dimensional tape all the way around the edge, which you saw that goes really nicely around the edge if you take off the release paper. And then I've cut a piece of vellum, and I cut that out of a mason jar, and I'm going to be adding it as well to the back of this little mason jar piece. I'm coloring in the lightning bugs that I'm adding to my jar with Y02, and just coloring their little hind ends like they're lit up. I also added some Martha Stewart sequins into, I actually don't even think it's sequins. I don't know what these are called necessarily. They're little bitty hearts and stars. So they're kind of like a sequin, but they're shiny and glittery, and they're really pretty, and they're super tiny. So I felt like that would be the perfect glittery thing to add to this mason jar. So I'm putting all my little lightning bugs in, making sure that they're facing front so that you can see them once they get closed in here. And then I'm adding my little vellum piece to the back to close up my mason jar. The reason I used vellum is because I wanted you to be able to see the color of the sky that I created through the mason jar, but I didn't want it to be blaring. Like, I didn't want those colors to be super bright coming through that mason jar. I wanted those colors toned down, but I still wanted them to have the color of the background. So now I'm using my B000 marker to go around the edges of the mason jar and add a little bit of blue. I also added a little bit of this blue to the wings. I just felt like the stark white of the mason jar was just a little too much, so I wanted to tone it down just a smidge. I have pre-embossed this little piece. There is a framelit that cuts this little piece out, and I pre-embossed it with copper embossing powder. I just absolutely love how the copper embossing powder looks going on top of these mason jars, because that's pretty darn close to the color of the top of a mason jar. Unless you get the silver ones. I guess there's silver ones too, but I thought that was the perfect color. And then I have one last little lightning bug that's going to rest on the top of this mason jar because somebody didn't get him caught. So he's kind of the guy that's hanging out on the edge, and yeah, he didn't make it in the jar. So, but it really like added something cute to this jar. I think it was the perfect little accent to really draw interest to the jar and not make the jar look so geometrically shaped, which it needed. So I'm going to use my aqua brush now, and I squeeze a little bit of water out onto my clear block, and then I'm just flicking that water off onto my background piece. When you use water-based ink, and then you splash water on it like this, it actually washes the ink out. That's the best way I can describe it. So it lightens up areas and it gives texture to the card. Now I'm using my Signo Uniball gel pen, and I'm just going around and adding little stars in the sky, and you can really see this whole background come alive when I do that. It's very flat and doesn't have a lot of feeling or texture beforehand, but when I go around and just add these little bitty dots to the sky to make it look like stars, it totally brings it to life. So, and I don't know if you've ever sat outside when it's like dark, but there's still a little bit of a glow of the sun, and then there's all the beautiful stars in the sky. But if you haven't, you should, because it's beautiful. All right, so now I need my crumb cake ink again, because there's this cute little twiggy type thing in this stamp set. Kind of reminds me of wheat, like what would be in a wheat field. So I went ahead and stamped it in crumb cake ink, and it just a little bit more of something to add interest to this card and make it feel a little bit more like you're sitting in the country, or this mason jar is sitting in like the grass or the weeds or wheat in the country. And then I'm using my snail adhesive here and adhering this panel piece down to a piece of basic black. The basic black piece was cut at 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. And then the panel that I used is cut at 4 inches by 5 1/4. Okay, so I'm going to add my mason jar to the front of this, and I'm just using my Tombow glue, and I'm only going around the edges. I don't want to put any glue in that vellum area that I've just used to cover the back, because it would show through. So I'm just going to use my Tombow glue to adhere this down to the card. And you might be wondering why I'm using the Tombow versus like possibly the fine tip glue pen. And that's just simply because of the heavy dutiness, I guess that's not a word, but we're going to go with it, of the Tombow. Tombow's pretty serious, heavy duty stuff. So before I started the video, I heat embossed in white this Hey Friend sentiment, and these sentiments are also from the Jar of Love stamp set. This stamp set really is great to have because it's got great sentiments, great images, and it's kind of like, I would say it's a great one to start out with. If you don't have a whole lot of stamp sets, I would say it's one that you could get and kind of start your collection with, and you would be really happy with it. Okay, so I just kind of measured there where I needed to trim this paper off at. Probably not the best way to do that. Was probably better to use a trimmer, but I didn't want to get it out. So now I'm going to use some more of this dimensional tape, and I just am pulling off some little pieces from the edges because I want to adhere this down, but I want to make sure it has the same thickness or pop up from the base as the mason jar, so that it's not like going down. I don't know how to explain that. Dimensionals would have made it not as tall, so I needed it to stick up from the card as much as the mason jar did. So now I'm using a little bit more Tombow just to have a little bit more hold on this, and it's going to overlap into my mason jar just a teeny tiny bit, and then I'm going to push the rest down and adhere everything into place. And this pretty much completes the card. Now I just have to add a little lightning bug right here because that black space felt like there was just too much black space. And so the lightning bug worked perfect right there. And I went ahead and colored him again with my Y02 and then the B000 on his wings. Putting a little bit of that light blue on the wings really actually added quite a bit to these lightning bugs. Okay, so now I'm going to use adhesive to finish off this card and put it on my card base. All right, I am so excited about this card. I absolutely love it. It's probably, I always say this, like, oh, it's my favorite card I've made in a long time. Here's the other one. I always have to practice a card before I show it to you guys to make sure it's going to work. A quick reminder, if you want the Thoughtful Branches bundle set, make sure you get that before August 31st because it will not be available after that. New kits are coming from me next week, new card kits, so you'll see those next week. And the holiday catalog begins September 1st. If you haven't received a holiday catalog from me yet, please let me know because I used a mailing service and there could be a chance that somehow it didn't work correctly. So I want to know if you haven't received it. And make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks so much for hanging out, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.